Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It's a very sunny spring day, and today it's the World Water Day that the UN established a few years ago. So we decided to have the official launch event for this book today because it was a very precious occasion. I'm personally very happy to present this book today because I had the chance to not only translate the book in Italian, but also to see the development of this book in the last 2 years. As a matter of fact, the book has been in the making for almost 10 years because I managed to meet and make the acquaintance with Professor Lundqvist in 2013 on the second edition of Trieste Next, the Science Research Festival that Italy Post organizes every year in September. And that's the first time that we actually met. That was the starting point of a mutual friendship, mutual cooperation, and 2 years ago, upon yet another visit by Professor Lundqvist in Italy, I had the courage to ask him to develop the concept of a book for us. And this is the result. So I'm very proud personally, and I would like to express my personal thanks to Professor Lundqvist. I say that I'm proud because Professor Lundqvist is a world-renowned scientist in the field of water management. He's a senior scientific advisor at the Stockholm International Water Institute. He's been working in water issues for almost 40 years. Throughout our friendship, he had the chance to tell me that he set up a postgraduate academic course in Stockholm, the first postgraduate academic course in water studies. So we really have the chance tonight to talk to a leading expert in water issues. So first of all, thanks for accepting our invitation. Thanks for accepting my invitation to write the book, and thanks for coming to Vicenza. The book is entitled The Perfect Storm, Water, Food, and 8 billion consumers. We are currently 8 billion living in the planet, but we will be soon reaching 10 billion inhabitants. And 10 billion people who are actually consuming not only water, but the resources that the planet is offering. So the book that we are presenting tonight has the very specific importance of connecting water, the ecosystems, the resources that the planet is offering us, and the use that that us as human beings are doing of such resources. The first question I wanted to ask you starts from something very recent that happened very recently here. It's the 22nd of March, and almost like more or less 10 days ago, the city of Vicenza was basically flooded after quite a long period of drought. The winter was pretty dry. It started raining, which is quite normal considering that it's winter time. That it was wintertime, and all of a sudden the rivers were not capable, apparently they were not capable of retaining the water, so there was water basically everywhere. Trains were not working, motorways were closed, and houses had damages. Things like this, erratic things like this, are happening quite frequently. So I wanted to understand whether this is a kind of new normality that we have to get used to, or if this erraticness that we are experiencing is connected to the very specific time that we are living now. I think it's open.
It's open? Yes. Okay. Thank you very, very much, Antonio. It's indeed a very nice and great pleasure to be here. And you said, of course, we are living in a crazy period of human history. But when I arrived in Italy yesterday and today, I've been here in Vicenza. It has been no thunderstorm, no rainfall, no drought, as far as I can see, no floods, no landslides. So what I have been reading, how people in Sweden have been, what we've heard about Italy during the last couple of years, especially for this area and the Po river basin, is what you just told us, that there are very rapid and very heavy torrential rainfall. Can you hear? Is it okay? Yeah, okay. And so I think we are in a crazy period of human history in many regards. But before I respond to your question, I would like to thank you for inviting me to prepare the manuscript for this book. And you asked me when I was in Trieste next, September 2022. I just undergone a major surgery, so I was thinking about having a nice, relaxing time. But then I thought about it, and I started to work on the manuscript after Christmas last year or New Year. So then most of 2023, I worked on this, and then I delivered the manuscript to Antonio in last December. And then he has done I can see, a fantastic, and also like torrential rainfall, is very rapid, fantastic job in translating it. So I'm very grateful for that. But my problem now is that I can't read it. Of course, and but I've used Google Translate and checked the number of sentences, and from what I've seen, I think you've done a great job to do the translation. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I also like very briefly to convey my thanks to some other individuals and organizations who have contributed to the contents of the book. One is Dr. Alessandro Bratti, who is the director of the Po administration in Parma, a good friend of mine. And we have two very good friends who have written a foreword and an afterword in this book. Professor Andrea Rinaldo, who received the Stockholm Water Prize last year in Sweden, and Giulio Boccaletti, who is wearing many hats. And I have benefited a lot from discussions with them. So I'm very grateful to many people in Italy and Italian hospitality, which is fantastic. Now, to your question about the dramatic events that you have experienced in Italy during especially the last couple of years, with heavy rainfall and then periods of droughts. And as you said, we can see it not only in Italy, but we have it to some extent in Sweden. We have it now. We have it very much in Spain. We have had it in France. And periods of very dry periods when there's virtually no rainfall. I was reading now that in Barcelona, in Catalonia, in Spain, they have not had rainfall for 3 years. 3 years. I mean, in Sweden, when we don't have rainfall for a few weeks, we think that the weather is bad. They have not had it for 3 years. You can imagine what type of problem they are facing. And at the same time as you had here in the Po Valley, and you had it a couple of years ago in the Marche region, in just south of Venice, a very heavy rainfall with torrential rainfall, with landslides and such problems. So I think that we can confirm by experience, our own experience, certainly farmers can do it, that we are in a new kind of era with erratic rainfall and long periods of droughts. Now, if you ask what is the main reason for this, why is the weather situation, why is climate, we talk about climate change, what are the causes, what are the drivers? It doesn't happen by itself, of course. And maybe I should just mention also that if we look back in history, we've always had variation in rainfall. For all of you who have read the Bible or heard about the Bible, about the 7 lean and the 7 fat years. These are about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So there have always been periods when there's been enough of rainfall for a good harvest for the fat years, but then there are periods when it's drought. So this is not anything new. But what is new is that the amplitude, that the variation, that the extreme events have become much more serious and much more frequent. And you probably know about the greenhouse gases. So this kind of change has happened primarily after the introduction of the Industrial Revolution about 150 or so years ago. So when we have pumped up oil, and then we are burning the oil, the fossil fuels, and then we're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And that will act as a kind of blanket and reduce the heat from going back to the atmosphere. So the sun is continuing to warm the world, but the heat is remaining on us. So that is the main driver, the main driver in this kind of problem. Now, what many people don't know so much about, I think, is that apart from carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases like methane, the water vapor, the water that is being sucked up from the ground, so to speak, and being collected in the clouds and in the atmosphere, the water vapor is also a very significant greenhouse gas. Are you familiar with that here? You know about that? So roughly, if we had not had the water vapor in the atmosphere and not the greenhouse gases, the temperature on Earth would have been about 30 degrees lower. So we can say that thanks to the water vapor and some of the old greenhouse gases, we have a planet that is livable. So greenhouse gases are important, but the thing now is that we have accumulated. They've increased to the extent that they've become a big, big threat for us. We start with that.
What, sir?
We start with that.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
The one thing that really struck me when I was curating and translating the book is that I came to the realization that, well, of course, we know that water is everywhere, but that there is so many misinformation regarding water, so many debunking that we have to do on topics regarding water. Of course, and the first thing that you highlight in the book is the difference between what we call blue water and what scholars call green water.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the difference and why it is important to also consider green water and not only blue water?
Yes, okay. Yes, I think for people who have been studying hydrology or methodology or those kind of water disciplines, they know about what we call the blue water. And the blue water is the liquid water. And in simple terms, the blue water is what is blue on the map. So if you see the rivers, the lakes, and the reservoirs on a map, they are always blue. So that is the blue water. Now, the green water is the soil moisture. So that is the amount of rainfall that can infiltrate through the surface of the land and create soil moisture. And that water is very, very important for the vegetation. So if a farmer wants to cultivate crops, he or she, it's often a she, at least in Africa, they rely on the green water. So if there's no green water, if there's not enough of soil moisture in the root zone of the landscape, then there will be no crops. So, and then we've had a long discussion in both in the research community and with donor agencies. Like maybe you're familiar with the Food and Agricultural Organization in Rome.
FAO.
FAO, yes. They have been, I think it's fair to say that most of both researchers and FAO and other organizations, they have been dealing with blue water. They put a lot of investments in building dams, in building different kind of pumping stations, because the groundwater is also called the blue water because it's possible to utilize. We cannot pump soil moisture. So by focusing on the blue water, both FAO and other national governments, different organizations, they have thought that they should be able to increase or help farmers by building dams, by building reservoirs to collect the blue water in reservoirs, and then people can use the water. But the critical situation, for instance, in Africa, primarily in Africa, is that there's not enough of money, there's not enough of technological capacity to build dams, to build reservoirs, to build canals. So for farmers in many parts of the world, they depend very much on the green water. But the green water is not something that governments and other agencies have paid much attention to. But if you look on the food that is produced in the world, it's primarily coming from the infiltration of rainwater into the soil, and that is the water that the crops can drink, so to speak. So it's one of my colleagues, yes, a lady called Malin Falkemark. She passed away before Christmas. She was 98 years old, so she has done a big job. And she was the pioneer for talking about the importance of green water. Because her argument was that if we don't help the farmers to infiltrate rainwater and to increase soil moisture, it will be very, very difficult for them to produce enough of food for the growing number of people. Now, you didn't ask me, but maybe I can raise the question myself, namely, if we should, what is the benefit of the green water versus the blue water? And I think that some people have thought that we should pay much, much more attention to the green water because it would help the farmers. And I think there's been a discussion that they have said that we don't have to pay so much attention to the blue water. But in my view, there is a heavy risk associated with the green water because that's the rain-fed agriculture, which is very difficult for farmers to manage. So for me, it's the combination between the green and the blue, which is the most important strategy.
I mentioned in my previous question that the book is a very helpful and effective tool to debunk some false legends regarding water. And one of those is water scarcity. We often hear about the concept that there is a lack of water, but in the book, I don't want to spoil too much, but you basically say that the water that we have now is exactly the same water that there was like a million years ago. Can you explain and let us understand why?
Yes, I think that probably, I don't know if you use it yourself, but yeah, that's good. The amount of water on the earth, on the planet, is the same now as it has been in previous historical periods. So we have the same amount of water in the world today as our forefathers had, or during the medieval period, or whatever period we want to look at. So when we talk about water scarcity, I think it's primarily a consequence of an increasing population who have to share the same amount of water today as a smaller population could share in previous periods. And you can see here the graph is the cube represent that is the same cube on the x-axis. We have the same, it shows that we have the same amount of water, but the number of dots inside the cubes is increasing. And each dot here represents 1,000 persons, or 100, I don't remember, maybe 100. So that means that over time, the amount of water that is available for each person has been reduced. Now, in the book, I make one example from Tanzania, because my wife and I, we moved to Tanzania in 1970. And in 1970, the population in Tanzania was about 12 million people. Do you know how many people are living in Tanzania today?
I know.
So, you know, because you translated the book. Today, the population in Tanzania is about 65 million. So in a period of about 50 years, the population has increased from 12 million to 60 million. But it's the same amount of water. And Dar es Salaam, which is the capital, or which was the capital of Tanzania in 1970, at that time, the population in Dar es Salaam was 320 million people. 320,000 people. And today it's about 6.5 million. So the whole situation in Africa, also in Asia, is that the population has increased, but the amount of water has not increased. It has rather become, as we talked about in the previous question, the water that is available is becoming more erratic. So we are facing a double kind of problem in the world, that the demand side, that the need for water is increasing as a result of population, whereas the amount of water is the same, but the amount of water is coming much more erratically. So we are in a tricky situation, I think, yes.
Before we move on to the second part of the title, as I mentioned, the title is The Perfect Storm, and the subtitle is Water, Food, and 8 Billion Consumers. Before we move on to the food part of the conversation, I would like you to discuss about other uses of water. Because we drink water, we use water for food, but we also need to remember that water is at the very basis of the so-called wash services. And in the book, you discuss and you focus on the importance of providing and ensuring and guaranteeing wash services as a basic requirement for development.
Yes, it's very good. Let me start by saying that if we look upon how much water is required to produce our daily bread, if we look upon how much water is used to produce the food that we are eating and that we are buying, it's, for Italy, maybe it's around 3 or 4 tons per person per day. So there's a huge amount of water that is required to produce the food that is required for the farmers to grow the crops. And if we take 1 kilo
just close.
Sorry, yes, sorry. And if we take, it varies between different type of food items. So if you want to have a red red meat, beef for your dinner, the amount of water that is required to produce 1 kilo of red meat, do you know it? Anybody would like to guess? It's roughly 15 tons. So if you put on your plate 200 grams of beef for your dinner, it requires several tons of water to produce that food. And it's not so that the cows are drinking a lot of water, but the amount of water required to produce meat is going to produce the feed for the cattle. So if you look for the land use in different parts of the world, quite a large part of the farmers' fields is used to produce fodder to feed the animals. So that's why we have such big figures to produce, water figures to produce meat. So compared to cereals, vegetables, fruits and such items, we require much less water. But so there is the water scarcity that we talked about before. It's also related to the fact that our food habits have become very water intensive. Now, if we collectively would be satisfied with eating such food items that would require less water, the problem will become much less also. So if you look at the diet, an average diet in United States, for instance, is about, you know about the figure because you're, but I think it's about 6 tons per person per day. That's the amount of food the water required to produce the food for one average person in United States. And for Italy, I don't have the figure for Italy, but maybe 4 tons or something. Sweden is about the same. Whereas if you look upon the diets in Africa or if you look upon the diet in India, India is a vegetarian country. The water, what we call the water footprint, is much lower in a country like India because they eat mainly cereals, they eat millets, those kind of very healthy food items. And they eat very little meat. They eat chicken and such things, but that's much less water as compared to beef. So the apart from the population increase that we see on this chart here, our diet is very, very important for analyzing how much water we actually are eating. We are drinking water, we say, but we're also eating water in terms of the food that is requiring water to cultivate. Now, back to your question also, Antonio. You asked about the combination between water for agriculture and wash. And
how it contributes to development.
Yeah. Wash is a combination of water supply for households and hygiene and sanitation. We use water to flush our toilets here in Europe, and we use water to wash our hands and to clean our houses, such things. Now, the amount of water that is required for those services, for wash, for drinking water, for household water, for cleaning, for washing and those kind of things, that's a very much less as compared to the amount of water that we use for agriculture. So agriculture is much, much more water intensive than water for other activities. It's much less than industry. And but what your question is about also is that if we look upon the situation in the poor countries, they usually have a very poor situation in terms of wash services. Most of the households, most of the individuals in Africa, in Asia to a large extent, to some extent in Latin America, they do not have a water supply inside the house. They use much, much less water for washing, for cleaning, for those kind of things. And as a result, they have a very high frequency of diarrheas, of different types of infections. And for a person who have mainly children, but also grown-ups, of course, but if children don't have access to clean water, if they cannot wash their hands, if they cannot wash the living quarters, they will have a number of infections. They will have diarrheas and such things. And that means if they get diarrheas, it means that the food that they're eating will go right through the body. And then the body will not be able to absorb the nutrients which are available in the food that they're putting in the mouth. So there's a very close connection, I think, and some people think also that we have to look upon the combination, how we use water in agriculture, that is to grow crops, to grow different types of food items, and how we use water to improve living conditions for people in the homes. So if we would have that coordination, I think we could have a more secure water and food situation. That would mean that the frequency of diarrheas would be reduced, so that people could benefit from the food that they're eating. But in planning, if you look upon what's happening in FAO in Rome, they don't deal with WASH. They deal with water for agriculture. And if you take UNESCO and WHO, the World Health Organization, they don't deal with agriculture, they deal with WASH. So they're separate type of governance systems. So people sitting in one office, they deal with one type of water issue. And then people are sitting in another office, they deal with another water issue. So my point is that it would be very sensible. It would be, we would be able to produce a synergy effect if there would be a better coordination between wash services and water in agriculture.
One thing that really shocked me while reading the book is reading, still in relation with WASH services, that, for example, when we're talking about education, that is a primary tool for development, attendance rates among girls, they tend to plummet during menstruation periods. That's because right, they don't have access to WASH services. So it's a very basic idea that you're talking about, but that could actually change things for the better.
Yes. And actually, you know, maybe you are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were accepted in 2015. That's the United Nations agencies who have agreed with, I think, 179 countries in the world to have a development agenda. And they have defined 17 Sustainable Development Goals and a number of targets. But the problem with these, I think, is that in the governments I'm not so familiar with Italy, but most of the governments, most of the countries that I know about, I mean, they're separate institutions, separate training programs, separate types of budgets for different tasks. And well, then we have a fairly lack of efficiency, I think.
Let's delve now into the food part. You've already mentioned about the water that we need in order to produce food. and food production was a major challenge, especially in the 70s. You mentioned in the book that right after the Second World War, like world governors were a bit skeptical about the possibility to feed a growing population. So you focus a lot on the Green Revolution, which came as a total novelty for me. And I would like you to explain and tell us a little bit more about the Green Revolution. And then I would like to start talking about the water that we are wasting together with the food that we are wasting. But first, let's talk about the Green Revolution and how it basically changed the whole scenario.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe it becomes too technical for you. I don't know. Can you follow? Is it too difficult?
Have you ever heard about the Green Revolution? More or less? Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, okay. But then I'm a social scientist myself. So I have worked a number of years to try to learn about, I grew up on a farm, so I know from where the food is coming. And I know a lot of these things from practice, so to speak. But sorry about some technical details here, but the Green Revolution is something that was developed, well, it started actually in the 1930s in the United States. And it was an attempt to increase the production of especially wheat, and then other crops came in, also rice particularly. And at that time, or around 1940, the United States had a close collaboration with Mexico, because Mexico had also very low agricultural production, and the population was increasing. So Mexico was in a situation where they were not able to feed the population. So then there was one guy in the United States called Norman Borlaug. He did agricultural research to increase the productivity, to improve the seeds which the farmers used to increase production. So he started with that work in Mexico in 1940, something like that. And they were able to increase the yields, the amount of food per acre or per hectare. They were able to increase that by about 3 times within a fairly short period of time. Now, this was in 1940s, 1950s, and a bit later in the 1960s, there was a huge crisis in Asia. In India and in Pakistan and those countries. And at that time, the population in India was about less than 300 million. You know the population in India today?
Over 1 billion.
Yeah, but you've read the book.
Well, it's on the news.
The population in India today is about 1.4 billion. In 1960, when there were 300 million, they were not able to feed the population. Now they're exporting food grains. And this is to a large extent thanks to the development of new seed varieties, but also the combination between new seeds and fertilizers, inorganic fertilizers that you can buy in a shop and such things, and water. So in India and also in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, some of those areas, Philippines, they started with the help of research being done in the United States and also in Mexico. They started this Green Revolution. They spent a lot of money. There were a lot of subsidies from the government for the farmers to invest in irrigation, among other things. And by doing this, they increased the production productivity quite significantly. But now there is also, in those days also, there's significant criticism, because this kind of, it's a revolution in terms of biological change and agricultural change. But it's a peaceful revolution. But it's also a revolution in terms of that they use much more chemicals. They use herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers. And this has become a big problem for the environment and for the water quality and such things. And it's also a human health problem. So that is one of the big question marks. And there's another very big discussion point now, very, a rather big issue, I would say, is that one of the big problems that we are facing in the world today is the loss of biodiversity. Because if we look upon the landscape, if we look upon how it looked like in a couple of generations ago, it contained a lot of different species, a lot of different types of trees, and in agriculture, the farmers used a wide variety of seeds. So when they cultivated paddy, for instance, rice, there were over 100,000 different varieties of seeds they could use. Now, as a result of the Green Revolution, that variation has been reduced very dramatically. So I understand this is very complex, but my point here for you, for your take-home message, so to speak, is that if you do something which is good in some regards, and there was a need, I think, for increasing agriculture, food production, but then it usually comes with a cost. So the increase in food production has been very, very important for India. Now, as I mentioned before, India is an exporter of grain. You know, in those days, in the 60s, they were important. They depended on imports. They had to use foreign currency to import the food. Now they can export and earn foreign currency. But the price of this, or one of the prices, or some of the prices, is the reduction in the biodiversity, is the spread of chemicals and different types of inputs in agriculture. And it's also a tremendous impact on water resources. Because the Indian government, they realized that for the farmers to be able to succeed with the Green Revolution, they needed to have safe and secure water supply. So the Indian government, they subsidized the energy for the farmers so they were able to pump water. So if you look upon different parts of India today, the groundwater level is going down, down, down. So I think that this is a kind of lesson that we learn in many different circumstances. Or you can gain something, you need some kind of improvement, but at the same time it will come with a cost. There are always the different sides of the coin, so to speak.
So the Green Revolution started as a strategy, a soft power strategy implemented by the US with the positive goal of reducing world hunger. And we are now living in a situation that sounds pretty contradictory. We live in a planet where we basically throw 50% of the food that we produce away. It's not really throwing away, but mostly. Can you tell us a little bit more about the concept of food waste, food loss, and why we should pay attention to the food that we are handling?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So Yes, that is one of the questions that are close to my heart. I think that the problem in the world today, as we see it, or as I see it, and I think as many see it, is that it's not a lack of food today. We have an overproduction of food in the world today. We are producing much more food than is healthy for our well-being. So today we have a bigger problem with obesity, with overweight, as compared to undernutrition. There are more people in the world today who are overweight and obese as compared to the number of undernourished. Now that is a complex issue. So, but I think that partly, or to a large extent, it has to do with our food habits, of course. So the figures you mentioned, Antonio, about the 50%, I think if we look upon what's happening from the field where the farmers are producing the food, if it's grain or if it's fruits, vegetables, whatever it is, and then they are selling it to the food industry and to the traders, and then we as consumers, we are buying this food in the market or in shops and such things. And if we look upon what's happening between the field and the consumers, about 1/3, a little bit more than 1/3 of the food is lost due to technical problems, due to storage and transport problems. And that problem is comparatively more severe in the poor countries and in the hot climate regions. So if we look upon Africa, for instance, the poor countries, high temperature, it's very difficult to transport vulnerable food items from the farmer's field into the market without losses. They don't want it, of course, because they will lose money then also. But they cannot afford to, the road system is bad and such things, and they don't have any cooling facilities. But then if we go further on from after the shops to the consumers, we as consumers, we are wasting a lot of the food that we could have eaten. And that means that we are buying much more food than we are requiring for our well-being. So if we combine the losses and the waste of food in the world, it looks different in different countries and different communities. But the combined losses and waste of food in the world today is close to 40%. And that means also that all the food that is lost and wasted, wasted means that we are throwing away the food that could be eaten. It's safe to eat. That means also that we are wasting the water, the different inputs that went into agriculture. We don't have any benefits from the waste. The farmers are losing from the losses, and society are losing from the waste. Now, these are the 40%. Now, you mentioned 50%, and I think there's one more increasing problem well, among the rich and among the wealthy countries, and that is overeating. I mentioned it before, that we are eating more food as compared to what our doctors tell us to eat. So the combined losses, waste, and overeating is, I would say, at least 50%. And you could say that is also an opportunity. So if we have good governments, if we have good incentives, if we have good responses among the population, among and restaurants, whatever it is, then we can reduce the losses and waste and overeating without any welfare gains. And that would mean that we could save water, we could save land, we could save different those kind of resources without any losses of welfare. That is something that I think should be, the household can, for an ordinary household, they can save a lot of money by trying to reduce the waste of food and the overeating. So that is a challenge for us, I think.
So we go to the consumer part of the title. In reading the book, one thing that really took my attention is the role of us, like inhabitants of this planet, because we tend to have a very passive approach to emergencies. We tend to forget about like climate or water emergencies that took place even a couple of months ago, periods of drought. As soon as they are over, it's in the back of our minds. So we have a passive attitude towards climate emergencies and water emergencies, but we tend to be very convinced about not changing our habits. So as consumers, you mentioned and you underline that it's very difficult to change our approach to the use of food and to the use of water. And at the same time, you also mention and highlight how we are very active in terms of exploiting ecosystems and exploiting nature for basically economic gains. Since we're heading towards the end of our talk tonight, I would like you to give us your glimpse on these issues and how we should behave as not only consumers, but also citizens. Earlier today, at the very beginning of this festival, we mentioned that this year we will have, at the global level, more than 70 political elections. I would go tonight home and check how many political programs mention the climate and the water crisis as part of their agenda. I think I have the answer, but still, that should be a priority.
Yeah, I think so. I think that what you are taking up here is the dilemma between political decisions, or the lack of political decisions, and the behavior of people. I think if you can scroll down, I have one slide here which I think is interesting.
Let's see. Potete andare avanti con le slide?
Like this one. This I think is one comment by the previous chairman of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. He comes from Luxembourg, I think, yes, but he was the commissioner for the EU. And he talked about the dilemma of politicians, because he's saying here that we, the politicians, we know quite well what to do, but we don't know how to be re-elected once we have done what needs to be done. That's, you can take it as partly as a joke, but in a democratic society like Italy, like Sweden, I think there is a challenge. How do we improve the communication between the political system and the citizens? You know, in Sweden we have Greta Thunberg. You probably heard about her, the 17-year-old girl who is making quite a big impact in UN meetings and different high-level meetings, where she's complaining about the lack of political action. She's talking mainly about the climate change kind of problem. She's accusing politicians to be too slow and doing too little to curb the emission of greenhouse gases. Now, that's fair enough, but if we look upon how ordinary people are acting in Sweden, for instance, which I know fairly well, of course, there's a high resistance among many people, for instance, to pay more for petrol. So among the consumers, among people in Sweden, they want to have a lower price on petrol when they go and fill their car. They want to have cheaper food so that they shall be able to buy more food, waste more food, eat more food. So, and then, you know, for the politicians who are trying to promote a green agenda, and we have such politicians, not too many. I think I could give you examples from Sweden also. I mean, they are rather reluctant. But I would say also that the voters, the constituencies, the political constituencies, they are also quite, well, reluctant to be active in terms of pushing for the green policies. We have a Green Party in Sweden, but they enjoy about, I think now they're down to 3% of the votes. So the green policies are something that, well, and you can take another slide also.
Possiamo andare avanti alla...
This is also an illustration of it's a colleague from New Zealand who was showing this image in a meeting we had it was in South Asia. And he was saying that both in New Zealand, as of course in other countries, there's a lot of information about climate change or global warming. And you know, this guy who is walking up here, he's reading about global warming in the newspaper, but he moves in the same direction as his forefathers maybe. So when we talk about the change of habits, change of motivation among people to modify their own behavior, it's not easy. It's easier to build a dam. It's easier to build a road. It's easier to do different type of investments. But to change human behavior is, well, it's not that very, very easy. And that at the same time we have the reduction of democracy in the world. So I think we are facing a huge challenge to how can we improve the dialogue between the political system, the leaders, so to speak, and the broad masses of population. Okay.
Thank you. So now it's time to open the floor for your questions and answers. We have a question over here. Do you want to talk in English or Italian? It's the same. Okay, let's move on to English. Otherwise, I was asking because we need to ask the technician to switch for the translation, you know. So go ahead in English, please. Your name?
Thank you. I'm Federica, and good evening. And I was wondering, what did you mean at the beginning with that the water levels are the same as they were in the past? Right? Did I understand it correctly?
Yeah, it's when we were talking about the quantity of water, and you say that the water that we have now is exactly the same amount of water that we had in in previous centuries. That's
because I was wondering, what did you mean by that? Because, for example, if I go outside and I look at the river, it's all dry. Also, the icebergs are melting. And so I just wanted to, I mean, what did you mean by that? Maybe the usage of water is different, not the level of water? I couldn't understand this thing. Thank you.
Let me start. Thank you very much. Shall I start with that we have the same amount of water today as in the past? You know, the water on the planet is moving around in what we call the hydrological cycle. So the radiation from the sun lifts about, I think, 500,000 cubic kilometers a year from the oceans, from the land, because of evaporation and because of transpiration, and also from us humans. I mean, we are transpiring some small amounts of water every day, of course, and that water goes back into atmosphere. Now, in the atmosphere, it will cool when it comes, if it's going up along a mountain ridge or something like that. And that means, and when the temperature is changing, then the water vapor will come down as precipitation. So the hydrological cycle means that the water on planet is circulating all the time, and the sun is the main driver of this, the energy from the sun. Now, so in that sense, we have the same amount of water today as our forefathers or during the time of Jesus Christ or whenever. It's the same amount of water, and it's basically the same amount of sunshine that is coming from the sun. There's a cyclical variation in the radiation, but over time, the amount of energy that is lifting the water from the oceans and from the terrestrial system is the same. Now, what is changing the situation is that humans have been very clever in adding water by pumping groundwater. And we also desalinize some small amounts of water. But the amount of water that we are pumping is, the amount of groundwater is huge. There's one, we don't have the slides now. But if we look upon the situation below the Sahara, the desert in northern Africa, Egypt is mainly desert, the Sudan is mainly desert, and the Chad is also mainly desert. So that part of Africa, the whole of northern Africa, is very dry, mostly desert. But underneath the desert, there's a huge amount of what you call fossil water, because that water was created in a previous geological era. And in Africa, they have not manipulated the groundwater to a very large extent yet. But they don't, in some parts of Africa, they don't have there's no rainfall. So they are forced to try to exploit the groundwater. And you can, in China, they are lowering the water table, the groundwater table, because they're pumping a lot of water. In California, they're down to 600-800 meters now. You know the Eiffel Tower in Paris, that's about 300 meters high. In California, they are drilling and pumping water from the double height of the Eiffel Tower. And in some parts of Libya, Libya next to Egypt, they have a lot of oil, they had a lot of money, So they were investing quite a lot of money in pumping water in the southern part of Libya. And they were down to, I've heard, I'm not quite sure, but according to my colleagues, they have been down to more than 1,000 meters where they've lifted water. And, you know, to lift water, it takes energy. And it takes a lot of investment to do the drilling, of course. So I think that we are, the hydrological cycle is one thing, but then humans, they're adding water by pumping groundwater. And that is a, shall we say, a deviation from the hydrological cycle. But now there's one thing which is, I think, very interesting, which is not so well documented yet, but by global warming, we are also pushing the water up into the atmosphere. Because when the heat is on, there will be more evaporation from more droughts. You had it in the Po Basin, and we have it in France, we have it in Spain, we had it in Sweden. And when temperature is increasing, there will be more evaporation. And that evaporation will end up as vapor in the sky, in the atmosphere. And when the atmosphere warms up, it can hold more moisture. So I think that we have lifted water from the ground up to where we need it in the urban areas in agriculture. But then through the climate change, the nature will lift it one step further. So there's a gradual movement of water from the ground up to the cities, to the agricultural areas, and then with the heating, then it goes up into the atmosphere. And in the book, I mentioned one example from California. Some colleagues say they have made a calculation about the extra water in the atmosphere on above California today as compared to 100 years ago. So according to their calculation, they say that the amount of water in the area, in the atmosphere above California is about 32 cubic kilometers extra water. Now, how much is that? It's about 2/3 of Lago di Garda. Lago di Garda here in Italy, it contains about 50 cubic kilometers of water. Now, the calculation here, California suggests or implies that the amount of water that has been lifted from the California area up into the sky is about 2/3 of the volume of water that you have in Lago di Garda here in Italy. And there are different types of comparisons, but what we are doing, what humans are doing, and what climate change is doing is to reshuffle water. We move water from one part of the world to another part. And I would argue, on my hypothesis, that we are moving fresh water into the ocean also. Because when there's a heavy rainfall and the farmers cannot make use of the heavy rainfall, it will flush out into the sea. I mean, the soil cannot absorb it, and there's not enough of reservoirs, not enough of structures to keep it. So the logical implication, I think, is that we are adding some of the fresh water into the oceans. And there's already enough of water in the oceans. So, that is a... so we have the same amount of water in the world, yes. but we are changing the magazines, we are changing the geographical location, and we are changing the speed of the hydrological cycle. So that is the human interference. So we talked about, I think, Andrea, he talked about the vagaries of nature in the forward here. I would add also, we also should talk about the vagaries of human action. Yes. Because human action are behind very much the global warming. It's not nature who is emitting greenhouse gases. I mean, there are some eruptions in volcanoes, such things, but basically the addition of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's coming from humans. And that will change through different types of feedback loops. It will change the water cycle, and it will change the landscape. So we are the engineers in both in a positive sense. We build structures, but we are also engineers in a questionable sense.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to our guest tonight, Jan Olof Lundqvist. Unfortunately, the time that we had is over, but I really recommend to spend some more time in further developing our knowledge of these issues, of the issues that we've been talking about, of the challenges and the struggles that as humans have faced in managing water, in diverting water, in using water as we wished. So I really recommend reading The Perfect Storm, Water, Food, and 8 Billion Responsible Consumers, I would add. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and thanks again to our special guest, Jan Olof Lundqvist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.